I know I've told this story many, many times before, but I can't remember at the moment if I've ever told it in a video. So I'm sorry if you've heard this before, but if you have, please don't say anything because it'll only embarrass me. When I was in college, actually when I was taking classes at Hagerstown Community College, I was in the computer lab one day and there was a guy at one of the computers nearby me who was talking on his phone, and he was having a conversation that, from the end of it that I heard, sounded like he was talking to someone he had met through a dating site. It sounded like one of those getting to know you phone conversations, like what do you like? What kind of movies do you like to go see? What's your favorite TV show? And the question he was answering when I overheard him must have been, like what kind of music do you like? And his answer was, I like everything except jazz and blues. And immediately, of course, I started working on it, and I started taking it to all the absurd extremes that you can take a statement like that. You like everything but jazz and blues? Everything. Southern gospel, Christian rock, black metal, neo cabaret, everything? Everything. Bluegrass punk, but not jazz and blues. Not arguably the two most important and influential forms of music in the history of the United States, if not the Western world in general. Everything but jazz and blues. So that conversation has always stayed with me ever since I heard it. It's been, 6 or 7 years ago at least, and I still think of it. And the reason that I wanted to tell you that story now is because as I speak to you, I happen to be sitting in the central parking lot of the city of Hagerstown. And the reason why that's significant and why that's related at all to that story I just told you is that the central parking lot of the city of Hagerstown is the site of the annual Western Maryland Blues Fest. Every year, usually on Memorial Day weekend or around that time, toward the end of May or the beginning of June, Hagerstown plays host to the Western Maryland Blues Fest, one of the largest regional music events of the year. And it's sort of a highlight of Hagerstown culture. It's a big outdoor music festival, and it happens right here in the central parking lot of the city of Hagerstown. So you've got two stages on either side of the parking lot, all the beer you can drink and are willing to pay for. It's a nice, fun event. And I'm not usually a concert goer or like a festival going type of guy, but I do like the blues. And it's a fun thing. And it's a good thing for Hagerstown. And Hagerstown is actually what I want to talk about for the most part in this video. The Blues Fest is an example of something that Hagerstown does right. That is a good thing for the city and for the surrounding area. That is a positive thing, a good thing about living in Hagerstown. There are a lot of not so good things about living in Hagerstown, and if you've watched my videos in the past, you have probably gotten the impression that Hagerstown is kind of a shithole. One of the reasons you may have gotten this impression is because I'm pretty sure I have used the phrase Hagerstown is kind of a shithole at least a few times in videos of mine, and meant it, and been sincere in making that declaration. There's a lot of stuff about Hagerstown, a lot of stuff about living in Hagerstown that is not terribly exciting, is not terribly encouraging. There are things that Hagerstown does regularly and things that Hagerstown has done in the past that just make you want to either roll your eyes or kind of throw your hands up or maybe put your fist through something, depending on what exactly we're talking about. It's odd when I think about it. For as much time as I've spent on this YouTube channel talking about Hagerstown, mostly on my Riffing on Mail Call series that I don't do anymore because they don't have mail call in the newspaper anymore, I only actually lived in Hagerstown for 4 years. And even then, I never lived in the city proper. I lived in an apartment complex right outside the city near the college. And yet I think about it and I talk about it all the time. And in many ways, I think about it as my hometown because it's the largest city in the county. It's the county seat. And for better or worse, it's sort of the political and cultural center of this part of the state where I live. And as Hagerstown goes, so goes the rest of Washington County. And if Hagerstown is doing well and things in Hagerstown are healthy and exciting, then it lifts up every place else around it. And if things in Hagerstown are shitty and depressing and discouraging, as they almost always are, it drags everything else down to that level too. And there's really no better recent example of something that Hagerstown has done wrong than the organization to which the logo on the hat that I'm wearing belongs, and that is the Hagerstown Suns, our local minor league baseball team. I should say our local minor league baseball team for the moment, because the team is moving in the next year or so, really whenever they're able to. They're only playing in Hagerstown right now because their stadium in the new city isn't ready yet. They're on borrowed time. They're the Hagerstown Suns only for as long as they need to be. Then they're moving to Fredericksburg, Virginia. They're going to have a new ballpark. They're going to be playing in a city that actually wants them, that actually courted the team and wanted them to move there. They'll be better off, I think. The Suns, or whatever they end up calling themselves when they get to Fredericksburg, will be much better off there than they are here. Because here in Hagerstown, they fell victim to one of the most damaging things about this place, and that is the apathy of the people, the apathy of the citizens of Hagerstown. They play in an old ballpark. They play in a ballpark that's, I think, 85 or 86 years old. It's run down. They've made efforts to sort of renovate it in the past, but it's just an old ballpark. And one of the deal breakers that made it a definite that the Suns would be leaving Hagerstown was that the team asked the city to help them build a new ballpark. And there was a proposal under consideration about a year or so ago for a new minor league ballpark that would have been built in downtown Hagerstown, right in the thick of it, right in the middle of everything. And the proposal was shot down. It was not necessarily entirely the fault of the city government. City government gets a lot of shit, and there are definitely valid reasons, I think, for giving Hagerstown city government a lot of shit. But there were people on the city council and in the mayor's office who really tried to make the new ballpark happen, and they ultimately were unable to do it because the people just did not want it. And I'm not suggesting that if the people really didn't want it, that it should have been forced on them against their will, but I am suggesting that maybe the people should have wanted it a little more. You know, it would have been a really energizing, exciting project to put a brand new, state-of-the-art ballpark right in the middle of downtown Hagerstown. It would have been a real jolt of electricity to the community, to the economy, to the culture, and it didn't happen, and it's not going to happen, and pretty soon there's not going to be a minor league baseball team in Hagerstown at all. There's going to be an abandoned, ancient, falling apart minor league ballpark. I'll give you another example of the apathy around here and the damage that it can do. This one's not as recent, but it goes even more to the heart of the community than the loss of the Suns, because this has to do with the railroad, which used to be the heart and soul of Hagerstown. In fact, one of Hagerstown's nicknames is the Hub City, and it was called the Hub City in large part because it was a major railroad hub. Now, the railroad itself, in general, has come down in the world. It has nothing to do specifically with Hagerstown, so that part perhaps was inevitable. But Hagerstown used to be the home to a very large roundhouse. The Western Maryland Railroad operated in Hagerstown for many years and was a major employer, and then Western Maryland was bought by CSX, and CSX owns and runs the railroad yard in Hagerstown today. At one point, this roundhouse, the Hagerstown Roundhouse, was the largest surviving roundhouse of its kind. It was this massive structure that was sitting out in the middle of the railroad yard, the CSX yard, and it hadn't been used for a long time. It had been, it had fallen into disuse and gone to ruin, but it was still a very important, very vital part of the history of Hagerstown. And there was an effort some years ago for the town to raise money from the community so that they could buy it and preserve it and renovate it and convert it into a railroad museum. Now, there is a railroad museum in Hagerstown. It's called the Roundhouse Museum, and it's located right at the edge of the CSX railroad yard. And the idea was to buy the roundhouse and convert it into a much larger, more impressive version of the Roundhouse Museum. There was this very big, very prolonged fundraising effort that resulted in the necessary money not being raised and the roundhouse being torn down. The roundhouse is gone. The historic roundhouse that symbolized the industry that gave Hagerstown its nickname and was the lifeblood of the community for decades, and happened to have great historical value as well, being the largest structure of its kind still around, at least in this country or in this part of the country, gone, wiped out, torn down because there were not enough people in Hagerstown who gave enough of a fuck about their own community and their own history and their own heritage to raise the money to buy that roundhouse. And I'm still, you perhaps can tell, I'm still a little irritated about that to this day. And that's been a long time ago. It's been at least like 20 years ago that happened. And I know drawing these sorts of sweeping conclusions is probably best avoided, and it's not always the greatest idea to use a single event to stand in for the character of an entire community throughout its history. But I don't know, I can't help but think back to the loss of the Roundhouse Museum every time Hagerstown passes up an opportunity to take a little bit of a risk and improve itself. And I could not stop thinking about the Roundhouse and the loss of the Roundhouse last year when the debate was going on whether or not to build the new ballpark in Hagerstown for the Suns.
Now, were there reasons not to build that ballpark downtown? Well, yeah, of course, there are lots of reasons not to do it. There are lots of reasons not to do anything. But the sad part was that that's all anybody ever talked about, were the reasons not to do it. It reminded me of, and I'm too young to remember this myself, but I've heard people talk about when they were preparing to start construction on the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. I mean, before they ever even were to the point of starting construction, when it was just a proposal. And there were people who thought that it was the worst idea they'd ever heard, that there would be just all this money lost on it, and it would be a huge disaster, it would be an embarrassment, it would destroy the entire city. And they went ahead and did it anyway. They convinced enough people to do it that it went ahead. And now the Inner Harbor in Baltimore is really, unless you're going to a baseball game or a football game, the only reason anybody ever goes to Baltimore who doesn't live there. I mean, the Inner Harbor is the tourist center of the entire city. It's where you go to shop. It's where the National Science Center is, the National Aquarium, the Maryland Science Center, I should say. But it's the jewel of Baltimore. Even though there were lots of reasons not to do it, and it was a risk. And the problem with Hagerstown is that there are so few people who are willing to take risks that eventually, if nothing is done in the next 10, 20 years, let's say, there won't be very much left to risk at all. And this thing they've tried to protect will be gone. Now, that's not to say that it's all bad, because certainly it is not all bad. In fact, one of the things that is good about it is, well, for instance, the place where I'm at now. I'm sitting in the parking lot at Fairgrounds Park. You can sort of see the grandstand behind me. That's where they hold the Great Hagerstown Fair every year. That always brings them in and seems to be a nice crowd-pleasing event. They also they have the 4th of July fireworks here. It's just a nice place. And in addition to Fairgrounds Park, there's the smaller but incredibly beautiful city park in Hagerstown with a beautiful lake, and the Fine Arts Museum is right there. In downtown, there's a brand new library. There's the Barbara Ingram School for the Arts, which is an arts high school, which just opened up 5 or 6 years ago, which is something we should all be really proud of. The Maryland Theater, which is this really old, renovated theater. I mean, it's the home of the Maryland Symphony Orchestra, which is, again, one of the real proud organizations of the community. There's just, the thing about Hagerstown is that there's good and there's bad. There are people here who care a great deal about their community, who work hard every day to make it better for people who live here, and there are people who honestly don't give a shit. about anyone but themselves, and who react to anything that might possibly change the status quo, which they also hate, with fear and suspicion and opposition. There is a great multi-ethnic community here. There's a lot of ethnic and racial and religious diversity that could be a source of great pride and strength, but isn't always regarded as such. There's poverty, and there's wealth. There's opportunity, and there's people who would like to have some more opportunity than they have and have had it denied them for whatever reason. When I describe it that way, it sounds a lot like a microcosm of the United States. But that should be no excuse